I'm JJ Walsh, your host in Hiroshima, Japan. And today I have the pleasure of connecting with the amazing Schyler Alexandra Cole. Thank you so much for joining from Tokyo.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to speak with you and everyone watching.
That's great. Now, I have been a fan of yours for a little while. I'm a big podcast listener.
Me
I
too.
love all the interviews you've done so far. Now, I've seen a few on Scaling Japan
Yay!
podcast,
Yeah.
right? Like talking about being a VC, venture capitalist, and then more recently on Unpacking Japan and talking about kind of the role of VCs and how it can help community as well as more sustainable issues. And so that got me really excited to have you on my show and focus more on how getting funding and having that understanding of the funds and the support financially that's out there for people with really great ideas in with a focus of helping our communities and society and the environment, but also having scalable business ideas.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
So you said that you grew up with a love of Japan. Where did that come from?
yeah. So it's actually a funny story. And then before I start on that, I just wanted to say when you reached out to me about talking with you, I was so excited to hear kind of the topics that you want to focus on in particular, because those aspects of investing and supporting companies and ideas are what I'm most passionate about and the whole reason why I've made this a career. So really, really happy to be speaking about all those topics today. But to answer your question, yes. So I have had an interest in Japan since elementary school, maybe even a little bit earlier. But one kind of key memory or core memory of mine was in elementary school. My school is very close to the local botanic garden. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, in the United States, and we would sometimes take field trips to the botanic garden, and it was actually in walking distance, so we could take a lot of very tiny steps and get there. And I really enjoyed the events that they held on different world cultures, including Japan. And so, but the ones about Japan just really, I guess, planted a seed. No pun intended. And I just thought that the language was beautiful, the art, the culture was so fascinating. And from there, was able to engage in the culture in various ways growing up. Eventually, taking Japanese in college, and then learning more about the um, the economy, as well as looking at the startup ecosystem in particular, in ways that, and eventually realizing that there are actually a lot of parallels between Japan and places like Memphis and places like the Southeast US, where I feel there is this tension between innovation and tradition, but a lot of opportunity to grow and to meet the needs of the people living in these places.
That's awesome. Now, you grew up in Memphis,
Mhm.
Tennessee, as you said,
Yeah.
the home of Elvis, but of
Yes,
course, home to
exactly.
many other wonderful things.
Most
Um,
definitely.
but then you went to Stanford, you studied economics, and
Yes.
then during your time at Stanford, it sounds like you had a really interesting research
Mhm.
study about social impact. Can you talk to that just a little bit?
Absolutely. So, actually, my undergraduate research was a huge catalyst for the things I'm doing now, and encapsulates a lot of my passions within investing, as well as some other areas that I think we'll be excited to talk about. So, like you mentioned, I studied economics in undergrad, and I was focused primarily on health and behavioral economics. And during my studies, I was really interested in nutrition and health in particular, as well as food ecosystems. And so I was reading a lot of literature, but eventually found myself quite frustrated with a lot of the methodologies, a lot of the assumptions that were being made to talk about various demographics, and in particular about the African American population. And so I said, well, I think there's a more socially and culturally competent way to go about these topics, and to not just conduct the research, but to propose solutions. And so I decided to do something about that myself, and ended up doing original research in the Bay Area as well as in Memphis. I created surveys that I thought were able to better target a lot of the core challenges and just core dynamics that the demographic faces, and ended up getting some very interesting results. Got some funding to do the research, and then ended up getting funding to start something related to my thesis and my research output. And so that ended up resulting in me starting Healthier Heritage, which was a social enterprise really dedicated to providing more socially and culturally competent food and health resources. Yeah, that's it. Yay! Amazing. I love this platform. It's so interactive. This is amazing. Um, yeah, founded Healthier Heritage, and really through Healthier Heritage is dedicated to providing education, resources, and a marketplace to be able to share goods and services and just information that people really weren't able to access in a very comfortable or accessible way.
That's awesome and so necessary. You hear so much about cities in the U.S. and across the world where they don't have access to fresh food, and then some projects trying to do community gardens, for example, but growing culturally relevant foods, which is part of their heritage, like you said. So it's healthier, but
Mhm.
it's also connected to who they're proud of, who they are, and where they come from. And I think we can see applications to that in Japan as well, right? Like we need more access to fresh food, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just love to kind of highlight exactly what you said about how it's the health portion, but it's actually also the cultural aspect in being proud of your heritage, proud of your traditions, and not having to sacrifice or really put stigma around that because it's not some other culture, um, some other way of eating. That there are ways to be healthy and to honor these various cultures. So definitely spot on point.
Now, we often say in Japan that we're 20 years behind progress, but I would say when we look at areas in cities which have no access to fresh food, we're kind of seeing a problem which is developing in Japan as well in the cities, how the number of farmers is on a steep decline.
Yeah,
So these kind of strategies for bringing fresh food back to where people live,
yeah.
this is definitely applicable around Japan in the cities as well, right?
Most definitely. And a lot of my work did involve farmers and one, supporting them in better accessing potential customers and getting closer to city centers, but also in supporting them in kind of making sure that their operations are able to continue forward. So there are a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities to really better integrate, better connect, and better have, I guess, an interdependence between consumers, farmers, and the various stakeholders that are involved in getting something from the ground to your plate. And definitely a lot of parallels between Japan and other geographies facing these challenges.
And I saw on your website, I think you were talking about being a cheerleader and
Yeah,
living on a farm.
yeah,
Was that at Stanford? You were cheerleading?
yeah. I was a cheerleader at Stanford. I cheered for 3 years. It's so funny because I never cheered in high school, but I always wanted to. I played tennis and I ran cross country and kind of cheer really didn't fit into those seasons. But I went to Stanford, decided to try some different things, and ended up joining the team, which was one of the best things I could have ever done. And maybe I'm prefacing something we'll talk about a little later, but one of the just most incredible things about being a cheerleader, of course, it's a lot of fun and you get to go to all these games and dance and whatever, but really being able to trust and be trusted in a very real way and for us a very physical way because we were doing stunts and having to support each other. That's one of the most incredible things I've ever experienced and want to continue being able to both be able to trust and be trusted in various aspects of life in a very kind of real and intangible way. So definitely the idea of trust is something that in that experience became just so clear how important it is, and it's continued throughout other aspects of what I've done since.
So it not only ties into the idea of fitness, and
Mhm.
you are into yoga and doing
Oh,
events which promote fitness and stretching
yes.
and loosening those hips, which many of us who work behind a desk we struggle with.
Yeah.
But also being part of a team, team building, trusting each other. These are concepts which I'm sure you've been applying and mentoring and helping people understand as they're talking about successful business as well,
Most
right?
definitely. Most definitely. There's so many aspects of trust that are involved in starting a business, getting funding for a business that I think maybe in some ways, in theory, you can understand, but when it really comes to dedicating yourself to your idea and something that you want to build, it becomes very real, oftentimes very scary to have that trust or to try and seek out that trust in other people. So it's a huge, huge aspect that I make sure. And then in my work, I want to help entrepreneurs to kind of face the challenge that it may come with developing and building this trust, and really how it's allocated as you kind of grow a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to point out, you've got this interesting event
Yeah.
where you're combining
Mhm.
fitness league,
Yes.
as part of team building, but also about fitness, I imagine. Tell us about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, the inspiration by Fitness League, which is one offering from startup CoCreation, which is a startup community founded in Tokyo, but really aims to create um, kind of a central node for internationally minded entrepreneurs, investors, and other stakeholders in related to startups and tech in Japan. And so, what we're really dedicated to is providing the resources, information, and any tools that these types of entrepreneurs or individuals may need to really thrive and find their own version of success within startups and tech in Japan. And so, we really want to support not just people in Japan, but those who are interested and wanting to engage in Japan. And so Fitness League is one offering that I was really inspired by. Really, a lot of this idea of trust, and I'll throw out a term to kind of get it out there, but the idea of social capital and what exactly that means and how to build it. And when you're in kind of in the startup realm, and so sometimes you may, or a lot of times you're meeting with people, trying to build connections, trying to build relationships, but even when you're talking about business, it's not always all about business. You are people interacting with each other, humans interacting with each other at the end of the day. And there's other things that you can connect on. And so, really, the idea of Fitness League was to be able to bring people together, related people together, but have a reason to connect that's not so just solely focused on what we're trying to build and what our goals are for our business or investing. And so, being able to get together, whether it's for yoga, for a hike, or for another activity. That was really why we decided to found Fitness League, and yeah, just do fun activities that kind of allow people to connect and see people as humans, even as we pursue our goals.
Now that makes a lot of sense. For anybody who's worked in Japan for a long time and worked at different companies or businesses, you know that once a year they usually do these team building trips where they try to connect with each other on a more personal level,
Right.
as well as making those bonds, which then make them a more effective business, right? So, this kind of strategy, having two parts of the relationship, is really clever.
Great, yeah. So we have a lot of fun, and really, I think that it's also an opportunity for people who are interested to kind of, if they have want to play basketball, so a community member can start that and allow some agency in what happens in the community. So definitely really happy to have this be a component and getting people together.
That's awesome. Sounds really interesting. And then we finished your time in Stanford. You were cheerleading,
Yeah.
your passion for yoga and how that's
Mhm.
led to other projects and connections with team building, as well as supporting entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
You came to Tokyo and you studied public policy.
Mhm. Yeah, I sure
How
did.
does that, I mean, that's such an important thing to understand if you are being a mentor or helping
Mhm.
entrepreneurs to have successful businesses, right?
Mhm. So I'll actually take a step back to health through heritage, because actually my experience, while I was loving the work I was doing in the primarily in Memphis and really excited by the impact, I felt motivated or felt that there was even more I wanted to do. And even though we were having great success, being impactful, I looked around and saw so many people and ideas that were already kind of in progress, or people trying to kind of execute on these ideas. And I thought that, well, if these people, these ideas have the right financial, social, or human capital, then they'd already be able to at least make even more progress towards solving the problems that they're tackling. And so that's when I decided for myself that, oh, actually, I want to solve this idea, this challenge of capital, this financial, social, human capital, be able to support these diverse ideas, these diverse people who have really clear, poignant solutions for a lot of the challenges that I'm also personally passionate about solving and building for myself. And so, kind of during that realization, I thought, well, how do I want to build this capital allocators toolkit? And so, for me, that really involves kind of two pillars. One is working directly with companies, directly with people, directly with teams. I think just personality wise, I love working with teams. I love taking action and seeing result and making things work. But also, I'm really passionate about systems change and positive systemic change. And for me, one way to accomplish that is through policy. And so I said, moving forward, I want to be able to build these two pillars to solving and to really contributing to this idea of capital allocation. And so that's how I ended up studying public policy. I went to the University of Tokyo and basically studied strategies for I guess public public-private partnerships in supporting. Yay! Oh yeah! Oh yes! So the Master of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo, amazing program. Um, and so, and how to better fund uh, both SMEs and startups, so social small and medium enterprises as well as startups. Part of my research looked at revenue-based investing, which is another strategy for investing in startups with that meet certain requirements or have certain characteristics, but also looking at how to better uh, couple financial support and kind of technical support or mentoring or whatever term you want to use. And because I think that while I'm in venture capital, that's just one way of kind of combining these two aspects. But I think there's room to expand how we provide really high quality support with really high quality, knowledgeable financing. So that's what I studied, employing both public policy and economics while I was at Todai.
Wow. And it's so important to have knowledge based on both sides, right? Quite a lot of, entrepreneurs out there changing the world, doing good things like the ocean cleanup. One of the big complaints that people have is we don't need people just cleaning it up. We need systemic change. We need to turn off
Yes.
the tap. Well, that's true, but who's actually out there making it happen, right? Systemic change takes a long
It
time.
takes a long
Positive change
time.
is slow, right?
Mm,
So we
yeah.
need both, right?
Most definitely, 100%, 100%. I think sometimes it can be, maybe it's not quite as appealing or not quite as exciting, but I think a combined effort, things that could happen more immediately with this longer term view is just absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And we have Louise Poppy joining from New Zealand. Thanks very much for joining, Louise. Now, Louise and I have chatted before. She does a lot of tours, but also I've been so impressed with gender equality initiatives in New Zealand. There's a lot about sustainable agriculture,
Mhm.
sustainable business in New Zealand we can learn from. So perfect timing for you to join, Louise.
Amazing. Thank you for joining.
Now, so you studied public policy and then you were working with Incubate Fund for a long time. Now, looking at the work that you were doing with Incubate Fund, I was really impressed. And now, this I've heard they started in 2010,
Mhm.
but they have so many great events and training as well as uh, doing VC and pitch contests and things. And I'm so excited to see women represented, right? And this focus on training and mentoring women
Mhm.
to help with that huge gender gap that we're struggling with in Japan, right?
Right, most definitely. So, like you said, I was at Incubate Fund for a while, and definitely internally as well as in collaboration with other local groups, are really working towards supporting women in venture capital as well as female entrepreneurs. My team in particular has been really supportive of supporting female venture capitalists. My team uh, was all the associates were female, which I think is really rare. They're overall the kind of venture ecosystem is still relatively small. It's having so many women in one place was just really amazing and a really strong example of what work is being done to really support female entrepreneurs and female venture capitalists. In addition to the work at Incubate Fund, which has started various groups to support not just internal employees, but uh, the employees of portfolio companies. Also work very closely with an organization, Women in Venture Capital, which was two amazing venture capitalists and friends. We really founded to create this safe space for female venture capitalists in primarily Tokyo, but definitely wider in Japan, with networking, community building, deal flow, which is kind of the potential investment opportunities that you can invest in as an entrepreneur, and really just creating a safe place and a cohesive place for women in venture capital to meet and share resources.
That's awesome. It's so, I mean, I often wonder why people choose Tokyo. I'm based in Hiroshima,
Yeah.
a smaller city, so I have the nature around me,
Mhm.
but it's so obvious that if you want to be there where all the business is happening and to have that huge influence and be able to meet so many other entrepreneurs and people who are doing new things, really you have to be in Tokyo right now. Isn't that right?
Yes. So I think logistically, just the highest concentration of people in kind of startups and venture and tech is in Tokyo. But I will say that there's a lot happening outside of Tokyo in various cities. And I think depending on what you want to do, kind of your focus area, there may be unique opportunities for you in these other cities outside of Tokyo. So while I will admit that for now, Tokyo's, I think, still very much a place to be if you have to pick one place to kind of accelerate your business building. But depending on kind of what grants, what industry you're in, other places in Japan may be a better fit more immediately.
I have heard that. I've heard from entrepreneurs in Fukuoka,
Mhm.
entrepreneurs in Kansai,
Yes.
that they're getting a lot of support, and even entrepreneurs in Hiroshima,
Yeah.
I've heard hints of it. So it is coming to smaller cities as well. But I often connect with amazing people doing amazing things around Japan. They say, "Oh, let's meet for coffee." Oh, what? You're not in Tokyo? Like so, it's much harder to connect.
Yes, yes, most definitely. So come to Tokyo sometimes if you're not in based there.
It's not too far away. Yeah, it's a 5-hour train ride, so yeah, not too bad. Now, Tyler, in your profile for your website, you talk about uh, being a ecosystem builder.
Mhm.
So you talked about policy. You talked a little bit about being a VC. We'll talk more about that. But could you just give us a little introduction of what does it mean to be an ecosystem builder?
Yeah, absolutely. So um, I think there can be maybe a bit of confusion of what is defined as an ecosystem, first and foremost. And so for me, that really involves the people, the places, the resources, the information that are concentrated in a defined geography. It doesn't always have to be a physical geography. Maybe we're talking about a digital space, but it's really all these people and components that work together to have some certain outcome. And so let's just take the Tokyo startup ecosystem. It's all the people, the places, the resources, the government, the academic, the private, all the different entities that work together to support kind of startups and whatever metrics that you're deciding to use, and move that forward. So that's kind of what I can say is maybe a working definition of what is an ecosystem, or what I mean when I say ecosystem in this case. And so, what I mean as an ecosystem builder is really leveraging what I feel is one of my strongest superpowers is connecting the dots. So, connecting the dots between people, between ideas, between organizations, and really making sure that these connections are not just synergistic, but maximally synergistic in kind of the pursuit of whatever aims are most relevant in the moment. And so, as an ecosystem builder, I see that role kind of looks like a few different things. Like I mentioned, I'm a co-founder of startup CoCreation, which is kind of one community group, but really aims to not just support our members, which we have about almost 450 members in our Slack group right now, but really working across communities to make sure that information flows are shared, opportunities are shared, and that we can all kind of benefit from the work that we're doing and really unlock silos between people and information, which I do feel is a major challenge in a lot of places, but definitely in Tokyo and definitely in Japan as well. That there's people who are doing exciting, interesting things and relevant things to what you're doing, but sometimes while they may be close proximity, you still aren't aware that they are doing those exciting things. So, as an ecosystem builder, really looking to make these connections, but also really contribute to supporting resources that make the process of starting a company or investing in a company or coming and starting whatever you're doing in Japan a little bit easier.
That's so important to understand, I think, how, and this connects to your work as a VC as well, how you describe it as helping build ideas
Mhm.
and supporting the founder or supporting the person making the ideas. And it can
Yep.
start pretty early on, and you can help them make connections along the way, kind of like a mentorship,
Mhm.
which I think is kind of different from how most of us think about VCs, and kind of this cold, you have to have your tech company
Mhm.
supported, like we don't think of it as a human side of
Mhm.
a VC. So that's nice to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah, I like to say exactly that. Like venture capitalists are humans too. It may seem like you said, like scary financial people. What is your business doing? X, Y, and Z. What are these metrics? Da 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 da. But we're humans. We get hungry. We're imperfect. We have our own goals and aspirations and all of those things and incentives. And so I think as an entrepreneur, first and foremost, it's really important to understand that, and that while also may be intimidating to approach a venture capitalists, we're still humans at the end of the day. And I think that kind of maybe one of my biggest pieces of advice, and if you're interested in when you're raising from venture capitalists, is to start building those relationships as soon as possible. Don't wait until like, oh, I need money yesterday. But really, as soon as you're able, start building these connections. If there's events or spaces where you can start to meet casually, start to build those relationships, and your not just your relationship with the venture capitalists that you're interested in maybe seeking investment, but your reputation amongst other stakeholders will really start to speak for you and at least and support you in kind of whatever your fundraising goals are. So really that relationship building is key, especially at the early stages. It's really a people business. There's just not as much data, there's not as many financials to really review. So it's really a huge portion is really about people.
That's so important to remember. And I've interviewed quite a lot of entrepreneurs who are focused on making the world a better place. We need you guys. But even when I talked to like Robin Lewis,
Mhm.
when they were first starting Mimizu, they didn't really have a forecast of
Mhm.
how it was going to make money. They just
Yeah.
had a great idea.
Mhm.
And now, years later, they have found revenue streams, and they've gotten so much support, probably from VCs like you. So you don't have to show that it's a profitable business. You really need to show your passion and a great idea to get started. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that venture capitalists look for in an early company. And I think one, like I mentioned, it's the people. Two, it's the product vision. So let's say you have maybe maybe not even an MVP or minimal viable product. Maybe you just kind of have an idea of what you're wanting to build. But really, how strong is the vision? How impactful is the vision? How do you share that? Are all things that are really important when I say we look at a product vision. And where do you want to take this? What is the change you want to see in the world? Venture capitalists also look at the team. So one term that we often use is founder market fit. So how, for the founders in particular, how suited are you towards the problem and the solution that you're building? Do you have some lived experience? Do you have some educational background, some professional background that allows you to be the best person to execute on your idea? But but in addition to those things, really for a venture backable business, you want at least two things. defensibility, which means how can you protect your idea? How can you protect your business and prevent other people from easily replicating it? And two, we look at scalability. So one aspect that separates an SME from a startup is this idea of scalability. And so that basically means, can you grow exponentially, which is kind of, let's say, an x squared if we haven't taken our calculus or algebra in a while, versus, let's say, a 2x growth. And so that's extremely important because uh, for the incentives in venture capital, you need a company that's able to scale and scale quickly to make the kind of the funding structure kind of make sense for all parties. And so you can have an incredible business, a worthwhile business, an impactful, world changing business, but it may not be a startup. It may not be uh, exponent able to scale exponentially, and that's okay. Like something that I really want to get across to entrepreneurs is that even if your company isn't venture backable by being scalable, able to grow exponentially and defensible, you can still have an amazing business, and that doesn't lessen the value, the worth of your idea or what you're doing. And since the growth of venture capital in the past 30 years, there has been kind of, I think, this put putting of venture capital and startups on a pedestal, but that's just one way to run a business. That's just one way to fund a business. There are other ways to support your idea and grow worthwhile and invest in worthwhile businesses. But that's kind of briefly some things that venture capitalists look for in a company, um, product vision, team, also the market. So something, not necessarily the size of the market is it's not always the most important thing, but because I see a lot of pitches that are like, we have this X large market that's expected to be this size in whatever year. And that information is all well and good, but it's really more about kind of, are you able to capture a piece of that market, and are the kind of market trends in your favor for what you're trying to do? So those are things we look for: product, team, market, and scalability and defensibility, at least starting out. But I think something that we're starting to talk about right now is kind of, you need a great idea, but you also, especially for I think us more socially minded entrepreneurs and those that want to have this impact, something that I've really experienced personally, but also in my support of entrepreneurs that aim to have this impact and have a strong vision for what they want the future to look like. Um, is at the end of the day, you want to have this impact, but you have to have a solid business as well, and those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. One motivation for me for coming into venture capital versus another funding strategy initially was because I felt a bit of a kind of this idea that doing well financially and doing good for the world kind of are mutually exclusive ideas, but that's definitely not the case. So as you're building a company that is more socially minded, even though I think sometimes it can be difficult to kind of focus on, okay, what are the unit economics, what is my business model, what's my operating model, all those things, that is just a tool for you to be able to have the impact that you want to have, and you need both of these things to be successful.
Those are all really important points to consider. And I'm so glad to hear you say over and over that you can do well and you can do good
Yes.
together.
Yes.
Such key point there.
Mhm.
But even if you have a great idea that's going to help the world, you do need to have a viable business. And that idea of having good business strategy, as well as a great idea, as well as passion, that's where talking to people like you can really help, right?
Yes, most definitely. And I think something that can also be difficult when I'm trying to have these conversations is that idea of trust, and trusting someone with your idea, trusting someone to learn about what you're doing and provide advice. A lot of entrepreneurs or it's a decent number of entrepreneurs that I work with, have this question of, oh, I don't want to share what I'm doing. I don't want someone to take it from me. I don't want, X, Y, or Z to happen, which I completely understand. It's scary to share kind of things you're most passionate about. But I think in your pursuit of finding people to um, share your idea, coming back to this idea of relationship building, maybe you don't share exactly what you're doing up front, but you start to talk to people, start to connect, start to talk about maybe the space or the industry, and then through these interactions, slowly decide that, oh, this is someone I can actually trust. This is someone I can share, um, and be open to kind of coming out of your comfort zone just a little bit in that perspective. But it is really challenging to be able to allocate and to allocate this trust. You can you need other people to support you, um, and being open to kind of that process of opening up will be very helpful in your journey.
I think that's so important to remember that it's a long process, right? And you need lots of expert advice along the way if you're going to have a successful business. You mentioned briefly that there are other avenues for people. It might not fit your business model to go with a VC. You might want to do crowdfunding, for example.
Right. So there's multiple funding strategies. This is existing, but also those that I think are still in development, and those that I'm working to kind of figure out what other ways we can fill funding gaps for worthwhile ideas and teams and businesses. But to talk first to some of the existing opportunities, like you mentioned, there's crowdfunding, which takes a few different could take a few different uh, strategies. There's crowdfunding that basically is more donation based, or you get maybe you provide some sort of item or gift to your donors. There's also equity crowdfunding, which um, investors in your campaign will eventually get some stake in your company, um, and that's one route. The crowdfunding actually can fit a wide range of business models. So whether you are a startup, an SME, or maybe you have a game that you're looking to develop, those are all options. Crowdfunding for sure, and I think I want to preface a discussion of um, these different funding strategies. That one isn't necessarily easier than the other. There are pros and cons to all funding strategies, and it's really um, up to you and up to your team to decide which ones are a best fit for you at any given time. And so while venture capital can seem like, oh, this is taking a long time to build these relationships, to go through the process, crowdfunding can take some time. I think fundraising is almost a full-time job in and of itself. Um, and so really being able to set up a campaign to gain support, really it's an involved process, even though there are different requirements and long-term expectations versus venture capital. There's also a funding strategy called revenue-based investing or revenue-based financing, which I'm particularly bullish about. Um, but it's basically a strategy that there are a few different versions, and depending on the firm that you work with, they may have a slightly different strategy. But it's basically tying in. You have some investment that's agreed upon upfront, and the you basically pay back the investment based off of your revenue for your company. So you have to be able to show some sort of monthly reoccurring revenue (MRR) or annual reoccurring revenue (ARR), depending on the fund or the depending on the entity that's providing this revenue based investing. But I do think that this is a very entrepreneur centric approach, because in this form of financing, you pay back your principal and any interest based off of how much income you have. So when you have higher revenue, then you pay back a little bit more, and when you have lower, you pay back less. So usually the terms are very transparent, and you pay back the investment amount, any interest based off of your revenue. And I think that is an interesting strategy, because it doesn't necessarily mean that versus venture capital, you have to have these expectations of scaling, you continue to scale at a certain rate through the lifetime of the company. But basically, as long as you can show some sort of revenue, then that you may be a candidate, depending on the particular fund and what type of companies they're interested in investing in. Um, Transparent terms and flexible payback. So that's one option. In Japan, there's one company that supports revenue-based investing for early stage companies, and I think one that is for later stage or growth stage companies. So this funding strategy is more widespread in the U.S. and Europe, as well as I think there's quite a few firms in India and Southeast Asia. But hopefully will be more options in Japan as well moving forward. But those are just a few funding options. There's grants, there's loans, there's other strategies. But something I'm really excited about, myself and other like-minded people are really asking this question of how can we better tailor capital to the types of ideas, companies, and projects that are out here doing great work. And so definitely look forward to more updates from me. And I'd love to share more information about what we come up with as far as funding a broader range of ideas and projects.
That's so important. And I'm so excited to see what you're doing this year because you're kind of going into a new project, a new type of work. Can't wait to hear more about that. But I think what you just said is so important about if you do have a great idea, you are an entrepreneur, you are trying to make things happen, you're not alone. Just reaching out and talking to someone like you can really help you get a clearer vision of what you need to do to get along the way, to get to the next step that you need to be at different stages of where your business idea is. It's always worth reaching out, right?
Yes, most definitely. It's so important to reach out and have regular conversations because, like you said, things will keep changing. You'll get to a certain stage, and then the landscape will look different. Like, where do I go from here? But something that we try and do with Startup Co-Creation, SCC, but also just as a venture capitalist working with entrepreneurs, is to connect with people who are either a couple steps ahead of you or maybe a step ahead of you, or even peers who are doing the same thing that you're doing, because then you can exchange ideas. You can recognize that, oh, other people have the same problem and we can figure it out and support each other. Or this person is two steps ahead. They've done X, Y, and Z. Maybe that will work for me. And so that's something that, especially in the Japanese startup ecosystem, especially for kind of more international or for English speakers, we're really looking to increase the concentration of people who can have these conversations and the spaces where these conversations can happen. Because in places like, let's say, SF or San Francisco or New York in the US, or maybe London and Paris, there are already greater concentrations of these types of conversations and places to have these conversations, but something through SEC and just in general with my primary role, really looking to continue to create spaces where these conversations can happen outside of maybe your team or your venture capitalist, but having kind of these third spaces where these conversations can happen.
Now, are you seeing, because we in tourism, we see a lot of positive movement for sustainability coming from the open borders and international customers
Mhm.
coming in asking for plant-based options, for example. They don't want the plastic bags, right? So they're coming from areas where there's kind of a higher or a more usual understanding of
Mhm.
sustainable
Mhm.
practices. Are you noticing as well for funding a lot of international interest in Japan for getting things which are maybe more social impact or more sustainably led in terms of funding as well from international?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot increasing interest in Japan in startups in kind of innovating. I think one challenge that I see is that it can be hard for kind of international investors or stakeholders to really plug into where a lot of this great work is happening in Japan. So that's something I'm really looking to facilitate and bridge because there's great people doing exciting work in Japan, and people who are interested from abroad. And so, really kind of creating this bridge and connecting the dots is something that's particularly important to me. And I think you're right as far definitely from a customer perspective, but also from kind of this investor perspective, um, I think continue to be more of kind of an international influence in what drives what's most important, what's seen as important in Japan. I see this initially in kind of the expectations for doing business, having a high standard, being competitive, and this idea of being globally competitive from Japan. Um, so I think that there's a lot of great work that can happen within the borders within the domestic market, but there's so much more opportunity if kind of Japan overall is more open to these ideas, these kind of best practices from abroad. So definitely this idea of being open to and adopting best practices, whether it's from investing, um, uh, business building to sustainability practices, are all things that I think will continue to have a greater push from the outside, and hopefully change some things and work collaboratively. Will be a collaborative effort with kind of the things that are already going well in Japan.
That's awesome because we know that it's so necessary and so needed, but sometimes the international influence, because they're already doing it, it gives
Yes.
that great benchmark or that great, this is best strategy kind of thing.
Yes, most definitely, most definitely.
Now,
Um,
this might be a good time to talk a little bit more about social capital.
yeah, absolutely. So definitely, I mean, this is probably, well, I specialize in the financial capital and the fundraising, the financing aspect of it. To me, social capital really underlies all the interactions and even the ability to allocate financial capital. We've talked a lot today already about trust, which is kind of one of the components of social capital. And I think along with that, there's so many components of social capital. And I think part of it is also kind of your baseline willingness to believe in and support someone else. Um, so, for example, maybe I want to invest in company A, found with a founder, and or let me even take a step back. If I'm as an investor, maybe I'm more prone to investing in certain ideas or certain industries or certain things that I'm most comfortable in, that I, as a baseline, feel more comfortable investing and supporting. But to me, that mindset, while it can be helpful, and kind of this idea of pattern matching and recognizing things that you're already familiar with, can also be really harmful and really exclude a lot of people, a lot of ideas, a lot of industries, a lot of problems from being invested in and supported. And so, why social capital is so important in this idea of kind of where your baseline understanding and willingness to support comes in is that you don't have to write a check to believe in someone. And so, kind of being able to recognize and take control of this non-monetary power, this non-monetary capital, and saying, well, how do we start here, and how do we use this to make sure that more ideas, more people, more teams are being invested in that are doing really great work. So I think that let's just take kind of maybe environmental or social, more socially minded um, ideas or projects. If my baseline is to say that, oh, these companies aren't going to scale to a certain extent, or these don't have strong business models, that already precludes me or makes sets me up to not be able to really recognize and see the power in what could be a great idea or a great business. And so, what I'm one thing I'm really passionate about and looking forward to is how to better target this aspect of social capital before any funding is being distributed. And so that's, I guess that's maybe we can talk about it in terms of industry, in terms of demographics, in terms of supporting women, what have you, but really making sure that we recognize just how powerful this is in supporting ideas and people.
Absolutely. And even on the very basic level of just liking, commenting, sharing,
Yeah, yeah,
this is not a financial burden on anybody. This is something we can do in the click of a button, but it really helps support people who are putting themselves out there and trying to make great ideas happen, right?
absolutely. Because there's so many things, and I think that, like you said, liking, sharing, those things don't don't take anything from you, but I think there can sometimes be a hesitation to want to show support even in those ways, and it's something to really question and think about, kind of why is there sometimes that hesitation, or maybe if you're supporting an idea or supporting a business, another way that this manifests is how much tolerance do you have for mistakes, for potential failure. And this is something that's especially important in venture capital and startups, because especially in the US, there's this idea of failure, of failing fast. So this idea of failure isn't an end; it's a way to learn. But that being said, some groups, some ideas don't really get that bandwidth to make mistakes and to quote unquote fail. And so, in a space that is supposedly set up on having these feedback loops and this idea of iteration, if my tolerance for someone making a mistake is far less than someone else, then that sets these entrepreneurship teams up for very different trajectories in their ability to kind of get resources for whatever they're doing. And manifest from liking, from sharing, from tolerance for mistakes and tolerance to support and see the potential, see the learning abilities and adaptability of entrepreneurs to whether what industries and what topics are seen as worthwhile to invest in. There's so many ways this idea of social capital manifests, and I think there's kind of immediate things we can do. We can start to think about implicit bias or even explicit bias, but also in the structures and processes that we have for supporting ideas and investing in and viewing ideas. What ways can we start to build better practice and policies so that our own human biases and our own, even as we maybe attempt to grow and to change, how can we make sure that that at least some of the processes help to make up for kind of our human deficiencies?
Yeah, I see things that hold us back. For example, jealousy
Mhm.
is one,
Absolutely.
like, it's a very, of course it's a human emotion, but you see somebody doing better than you want to be there and they're already doing it. So I'm not going to share what they're doing because I'm like kind of jealous. Just get over that and be like, wow, what they're doing is amazing. I'm
Yeah,
going to promote what they're doing, and then it comes back tenfold
absolutely.
to you, and people appreciate you sharing without personal benefit, and
Yeah.
then when you do something you get the support, right?
Most definitely. I agree 100%. I think something I like to call is a karmic cap table, which is not necessarily the financial, a cap table is what's used in venture capital to kind of see who your investors are, how much they have, and whatever, how much investment they have, percentage, all that. Um, but really, the idea of, like you said, kind of being positive, sharing, having this gift forward mentality, being able to be excited for other people doing great things, I think comes back to you in ways that maybe it's not always easy to point to or connect, but really, just karmically speaking, I think that's the way to go and has a way of bringing very positive things back to you.
For sure. I love your positive energy. It's so nice to talk to someone who has so much influence on funding, but is also such a mentor. And I think many of us, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank. It's fun to watch, right? It's entertaining.
Definitely fun to watch.
Um, but you see how these angel investors, they are also acting as mentors.
Mhm,
They take on projects that they personally have expertise in,
mhm.
and they see it over many years until it's gaining traction, right?
Right, absolutely. And I really appreciate you saying that because for me, I really want to increase transparency and really increase the ability for people to understand what tools are available. And if they are helpful, be able to use them and access them to their full ability. Because unfortunately, there's still the venture capital industry is still very opaque and unfortunately opaque by design in a lot of ways. But moving forward, wanting to continue to be an advocate, to be a mentor, and to really share tools and resources that can be helpful.
That's wonderful. We just have about 5 more minutes. Is there anything coming up for you this year? What are you excited about? What things are kind of on your radar that you're hoping to see develop more?
Yeah, so a lot of things I'm really excited about. And kind of we mentioned earlier that I'm starting a new role, and part of that will be still investing, still supporting businesses, but also having a greater policy component and a greater cross border component. Something that I think is a superpower, and I see in a lot of other people this idea of being able to have dynamic experiences across geographies. And I think unfortunately, and not necessarily always unfortunately, but especially in the area of early stage investing, it can be very geography specific. But I really see an opportunity in supporting people that have these dynamic relationships and ability to succeed across geographies and being able to support them in that. So whether that's a business, whether that's a project, whether that's policy, and really seeing how we can better support interests across the border. Those are all things I'll be working on this year, and definitely will have some exciting updates in the next month or two. So please be on the lookout for that. Additionally, outside of but connected to my work in as an investor and supporting companies, is continuing to really show and weld wellness and mobility with um, your professional work. So I think that those things are mutually exclusive and they do benefit each other. So if you're taking care of yourself, your body, your mind, your spirit, whatever you believe in, I think that definitely helps your professional life as well. So through Honor Your Flex, which is my kind of mobility and movement brand, will continue. Yes, that's me. Yay! We'll be continuing to support entrepreneurs, tech people, people working in corporate to find a movement that fits into their lives and supports the great work that they're doing. So, really excited on a couple of fronts, and definitely hope to talk soon about those things in more detail.
I love your philosophy page here. Strength
Yes.
is not the opposite of flexibility, they go hand in hand.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's one of my favorite favorite posts and just ideas because I think um, even just strictly looking at it from a fitness perspective, there definitely sometimes feels like a trade off between getting strong, making progress in the gym, and flexibility. But like I said, they go hand in hand and support each other and can benefit each other and be worked on. Even you can work on your flexibility and strength in at the same time. And I think that that applies to just different aspects of life, and whether it's kind of going back to the idea of doing good and doing well, those things are mutually exclusive, and we really just have to be intentional about our passion to connect these worlds and to make progress. So that's really an underlying theme of a lot of what I'm doing is that these things actually connect and work well together. We just have to recognize and being willing to take the steps forward to make it happen. So definitely thank you so much for
Absolutely.
sharing that. I'm glad we can make that connection.
Yeah, fantastic. And to be honest, flexibility is one of the weaknesses
Mm,
I think Japanese businesses have. Is it's one of the strengths of American business. Maybe we're
mhm.
lacking in efficiency,
Right.
but being able to see the customer on a case by case basis, being able to create policies on a case by case basis, it's kind of a weakness in Japan right now. So we need physical, but also
Mhm.
mental flexibility, right?
Yes, you're 200, 300, 400, 500% correct on that. And I think just a greater theme of that, you know, each geography, each person has their own strengths and areas of improvement. But I think that we shouldn't see our areas of improvement as negative or bad, just ways to see how can we learn, how can we exchange with other people, other geographies, and use what we are uniquely able to do and enhance that through learnings and exchange with other people, other walks of life, other geographies. So whether it's your physical training or in your business life, being open to kind of both of those things, seeing it as an opportunity to grow uniquely is, I think, extremely important.
Well, thank you so much, Skylar. So much great insight here. And also, I'm just so happy you're in Japan because you're such a positive force, but also you're supporting so many people with great ideas who are trying to do good
Mhm.
in business as well as in their life and for the
Mhm.
planet. So, thank you so much for all you do.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. And anyone listening, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, wanting support. Always happy to support and make connections to see if someone who can be helpful to you as well.
Awesome. And good luck in this year of the dragon. We're
Yes.
excited to hear all your new projects.
Yay. Thank you so much and look forward to giving some updates.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining. See you again next time. Thanks, Skylar.